right.
We are ready.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Troy City Council for Monday, March 18th, 2020. It is 7 o'clock. Welcome council members and welcome the staff members and members of the public that are joining us this evening. My name is William Lutz. I am president of council. I am here in the city building along with our auditor, Mr. Frigge, Mr. Titterington, and Mrs. Knight. At this time, we will have the invocation for Mr. Allen. And after the invocation, Mr. Allen will do the Pledge of Allegiance solo. So please let's bow our heads.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Lord, I pray that you guide us always, satisfy the needs that need to be met during this meeting. Strengthen us as we make tough decisions. Father, please guide us so that this meeting can be productive. Let us be effective and decisive. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That's the way to do it. Thank you, Mr. Allen. This time we'll go to the roll call. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Terwilliger,
Here.
Mr. Swazer,
Here.
Mr. Twist,
Here.
Mr. Siebert,
Here.
Mr. Allen,
Here.
Mr. Rozell,
Here.
Mrs. Snee,
Here.
Mr. Phillips,
Here.
Mr. Schilling.
Here.
All members are present.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read a summary minutes of the May 4th, 2020 meeting of council?
Minutes of council, May 4, 2020. Committee reports. Buildings and Utilities Committee recommended that legislation be prepared to adopt the ADA transition plan. Resolution number R32, 2020, adopting ADA transition plan was given first reading. Ordinance number O13, 2020, declaring property as surplus was given fifth reading. Ordinance number O24, 2020, final acceptance of an annexation of 43.5915 acres, first reading and adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:24 p.m.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. How does council wish to dispose of this item?
Move to accept. Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Rozell and seconded by Mr. Twist, I believe. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Siebert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. We have 5 committee reports this evening. We will begin with the Community and Economic Development Committee with Chairwoman Lynn Snee.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Community and Economic Development Committee met remotely on May 11th to consider authorizing the city to participate in the program year 2020 Community Housing Impact and Preservation, or CHIP, program partnership agreement with Miami County, Piqua, and Tip City. Under the agreement, a Troy allocation of $283,000 is being requested for 4 rehabilitation and 4 repair projects. That amount includes $23,000 of general administration funds. If Troy is not in the Miami County partnership agreement, no CHIP funds, if awarded, can be spent for rehabilitation or repair projects for homes in Troy under the CHIP program. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to execute the program year 2020 CHIP program partnership agreement between Miami County, the City of Piqua, the City of Tip City, and the City of Troy, which agreement is for the period of September 1st, 2020 through April 30th, 2023. The committee supports emergency legislation so that Miami County may complete the application process and file the application with the Office of Community Development before June 24th, 2020. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Rozell and Mr. I lost my mouse there. Mr. Rozell, and who else?
Mr. Twist. Mr. Twist.
Twist, Twist, and myself as chair.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Snee. Do council members have any comments or questions on this particular report? Seeing none, we will move on to the Community Partnerships Committee and Chairman Bill Rozell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Community Partnerships Committee met remotely on May 11th to consider the request that the property owned by Lincoln Community Center Association Incorporated, located at 124 Edge Street, be transferred to the city of Troy. This property is adjacent to the center at 110 Edge Street, which is in the name of the city of Troy. The 124 Edge Street property will need to be included into a new construction project of Lincoln Community Center, and the property needs to be in one ownership as construction cannot take place across lot lines. It is the recommendation of this committee the legislation be prepared accepting the transfer of the 0.37400 acre parcel at 124 Edge Street, parcel DO8-251090 into the name of the city of Troy. As this action is related to the new construction project of Lincoln Community Center, this committee supports emergency legislation so there is no delay in that project. This is respectfully submitted, Zach Allen, John Schweizer, and myself as chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Rozell. Do any council members have any comments or questions on this report?
Mr. President,
Mrs.
what are the next steps involved in any approval, if any, by the city council on this project?
On the project, none. On the combination, you handle this, and then the only other thing that you have is the vacation of the alley. I take that back. You have another one, and that is to amend the contract between the CIC and the city so that the project parameters, not the project, the agreement we have with Lincoln Community Center, because it's on our land and our building, is amended to include this property, as well as some changes to the maintenance, exterior maintenance per discussion with the park superintendent. Nothing that impacts us negatively, but that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Snee. Any other comments or questions? We will move on to the Finance Committee with Councilman John Schweizer.
Yeah, we have one committee report tonight. This committee met remotely on May 11th, 2020 to review the proposed ordinance amendments that would establish a payment plan not to exceed 180 days instead of the now permitted 90 days for customers who have delinquent utility bills paid in full, provided the delinquency can be related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also to potentially establish a reimbursable grant program to assist those customers. This committee supports establishing provisions to assist the city's utility customers who have delinquent accounts due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we recommend that section 909.05 be amended to include the wording in the detailed report so that the provisions are effective as staff is working with these customers to whom the provisions are applicable. This committee supports emergency legislation. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Phillips, Mr. Sievert, and myself as chair.
Thank you, Mr. Schweizer. Do council members have any comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, we'll move on to the last committee of the night. We have two reports from the Recreations and Parks Committee with Mr. Schilling. Mr. Schilling, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The first one we're going to deal with is the granted electric right-of-way and easement to the Dayton Power and Light Company at Waco Park associated with the ConAgra Food Incorporated expansion. The committee met on May 11th to consider authorizing the Board of Park Commissioners to grant an electric right-of-way and easement to the Dayton Power and Light Company, DP&L, at Waco Park. DP&L plans an electric improvement in the area of Waco Park that will permit DP&L to maintain the reliability of an electric feed that is part of an expansion project at Conagra Foods Incorporated. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Board of Park Commissioners to grant a right-of-way and easement to the Dayton Power and Light Company at Waco Park so that the expansion project at Conagra Foods can continue without delay. The committee supports emergency legislation so that the easement document can be executed. This is respectfully submitted by Mr. Bobby Phillips, Mr. John Twilliger, and myself, Jeff Schilling, as chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Schilling. Do council members have any comments or questions on this item? Mr. Schilling, please go ahead with the last item you have this evening.
Okay, ordinance numbers 013-2020 declaring a part of Archer Park as surplus. The committee met remotely on May 11th, 2020 to review declaring as surplus a 0.1221 acre portion of Archer Park located to the rear of in-lot 9405 as provided by ordinance number 013-2020. The committee members discussed concerns regarding the recommendation of the Board of Park Commissioners regarding the parcel. The mayor requested that declaring this parcel and other parcels as surplus be suspended until certain actions have been taken. The committee supports this request. It is the recommendation of this committee that ordinance number 013-2020 declaring as surplus a portion of Archer Park be denied. It is a recommendation of this committee that council not consider declaring a surplus a portion of Archer Park located to the rear of in-lot 9405 or any parcel, including the sale of Waco Park, until such time as the investigation has been conducted and documented regarding encroachments onto parcel of public property located to the rear of in-lot 9405. A survey of parkland to identify encroachments on the public property has been completed, and there is an established policy and procedure related to considering public property being declared as surplus. That the clerk of council forward a copy of this report to the Board of Park Commissioners. This is being respectively submitted by Mr. Bobby Phillips, Mr. John Twilliger, and myself, Jeff Schilling, as chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Schilling. Do any council members have any comments or questions on this report?
I've got a couple.
Mr. Rozell, please go ahead.
I just want to know that the park board has received a copy of this already.
That's correct.
And what?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so do we have a status of what the investigation has been and or the establishment of policies and procedures?
The chair of the park board has requested that staff begin the investigation. That just started today. It will be handled forthwith. Can't give you a target date because we want to, all depend on what we find. Could be shorter, could be longer. With regards to the the surveying of the parklands, staff has been looking at that. Let's see, our management analyst will be going out with one of our engineering techs, who's also a surveyor, to look at a couple of parcels that appear that they may have some encroachments, but that's a work in progress, and we'll be providing a report to the park board as soon as we wrap that one up. And then the third is that we have started to draft some language to provide to and from the park board that addresses an objective process or an objective review and criteria that should be followed when recommendations of declaring surplus. Park could be parkland, could be city land, so it would apply to both the park board and the city administration for any future recommendations. So that is all underway.
Thank you, Mr. Titterington.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Twist.
I guess just some clarification. I thought we were just suspending, I guess, voting on this where the recommendation is actually to be denied. So a little confusion there where we say we're going to suspend until certain actions have been taken, but then we're denying it below. So a little concerned with that. I thought we were just suspending until we do this investigation. And I guess 2 questions on that. Does this investigation, will it cost anything to the city outside of those normal duties of those involved? And with this specific legislation, once we are doing Archer Park first, will that come back to be able to be voted on? Once Archer Park is done, because it sounds like in the recommendations, all public property has to be evaluated before any decision is made. So I would like some clarification on this.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Titterington.
So answer the last question first. Probably the easiest way is to move this to another reading. Suspending is, I think, more just a generic feeling than actually official action that has to be taken. So rather than take any action on it, you could read it for a 6th time and then continue to read it until satisfaction is there to actually take a vote. As far as any cost of an investigation, that will be handled in-house. We may have some consulting that we do with our labor attorney to make sure we're on the right path, but that's minimal and we budget that. That's just typical of any annual work plan. So nothing extraordinary as far as costs go.
So is there the attempt then is once we investigate the Archer Park, we would be able to come back and evaluate this specific in-lot. We are not waiting for all parks to be evaluated and all all city property to be evaluated on encroachments, et cetera, correct?
That is really up to the council as to what point they want to do that. At this point, unless we uncover something that we haven't seen, because right now we are looking at all of the aerial maps and the plot lines that are associated with the county auditor and the GIS system. Right now, we are only seeing a few relatively minor encroachments. However, there are tree canopies, and so they will be going out, but we don't suspect that we're going to see anything major. Certainly nothing. I don't think that that looks like the Archer Park issue that we have in front of you right now. So, timing wise, if it's taken to another reading, we can give you an updated report in 2 weeks, and perhaps we will be we're ready to go. I do know that from the mayor, we do want a policy in place to dictate how we handle future requests. We have one pending that is sitting in committee, that being Waco Park. We also have another request from a property owner adjacent to Archer Park who would like consideration as well. So it's important we have a policy in place, and that will, like I said, we've drafted some language and we're discussing with the park board how to proceed.
Are there any other further comments or questions on this?
I have
I do.
2 questions I would be interested in.
We'll go to Mr. Terwilliger first and then Mrs. Stay. Mr. Terwilliger.
Number 1, with the Waco Park and the electric issues, is that a time-sensitive issue?
No, as far as the easement is, and that's why we're asking for emergency. The easement can be recorded as if Waco Park belongs to us. If it is sold, then the easement would be included in the sale. And so it would carry forward to the new property owner.
Have we gotten any response from the park board?
Regarding all of this?
The format, if things are judged on a case-by-case basis, what are the bare fundamentals they start judging from?
So we received some draft bullet points from the chair that is being vetted. We've actually provided some input and we'll be providing more input to that. So we have started a dialogue. We have start sharing drafts that we'd like the park board to recommend to council and then the council to adopt as general guidelines and a policy.
Thank you.
Mrs. Snee, go ahead.
Yes, just to clarify, I want to be sure I understood Mr. Titterington correctly. You are looking at every park parcel owned by the city or the Board of Park Commissioners to see if there are encroachments, correct?
I believe there are 26 parks and we're looking at all of them, yes.
Okay. And then secondly, just to go back to something Mr. Twist said, the recommendation coming from this committee is to deny this ordinance, not have it go to another reading. Am I correct on that?
Would leave that to the chair.
Correct. The request is to deny the item. When we get
That
to
is
this
correct.
portion, when we get to this portion in the meeting, it will be up to council to decide how. I will ask if there's any objections going to a seventh reading.
Okay.
Are there
Thank
any objections going to a seventh reading? I will immediately ask for council how they want to dispose of the item.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all.
Any other comments or questions on this item from council members? Okay, moving on. Mrs. Knight, did we receive any citizen comments on any of the committee reports that have been received? No citizen comments have been received. Mrs. Knight, will you please read resolution R32, 2020?
Resolution number R32, 2020. Resolution adopting the City of Troy, Ohio Americans with Disabilities ADA Transition Plan and authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to authorize routine updates to said plan. This would be the second reading.
Council members, how do we wish to dispose of the item?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Phillips to suspend the three reading rule. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Siebert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mrs. C,
Yes,
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swayze.
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It has been moved by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution, and I believe it was seconded by Mr. Twist. Are there any comments or questions on the item before the vote is taken? Hearing none, Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Siebert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mrs. C,
yes,
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Twilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swayze,
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read resolution R33, 2020?
Resolution number R33, 2020. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to enter into the PY 2020 CHIP Program Partnership Agreement by and between Miami County Board of Commissioners, the City of Pickle, Ohio, and the City of Tip City, Ohio, and the City of Troy, Ohio, for the Ohio Development Services Administration ODSA Community Housing Impact Preservation CHIP Program and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. How do council members wish to act on this item?
Motion to suspend.
Second.
second,
It has been moved by Mr. Twist and seconded by Mr. Phillips to suspend the three reading rule on this item. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
They can't hear you.
Mrs. C,
yes,
Mr.
Can't
Phillips,
hear me.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Seaver.
Yes.
The three reading rule has been suspended. How do council members wish to proceed?
Move to
Move for
adopt.
approval.
It has been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mrs. Snead to adopt the resolution. Are there any comments or questions on this item before we prepare to vote? Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mrs. Snead,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read ordinance 013-2020?
Ordinance number 013-2020, ordinance declaring municipally owned real property as no longer needed for municipal purposes and authorizing the sale of such excess property. This is the sixth reading.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. As I previously stated, we have a request from the administration to move this to a seventh reading. That's a correct way to state that. However, if council wants to vote on that, that's completely in their purview. Are there any objections from any council members having this going to a seventh reading? Hearing no objections, this stand is the sixth reading. This will go to a seventh reading at our next meeting. Mrs. Knight, will you please read ordinance 025-2020?
Ordinance number 025-2020, ordinance authorizing the acceptance of parcel D08251090 located at 124 Ash Street by the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is property adjacent to Lincoln Community Center, first reading.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. How do council members wish to move on the item?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Rozell and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to waive the three reading rule. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Snead,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It has been moved by Mr. Terwilliger and seconded by Mr. Schilling to adopt the ordinance. Are there any final comments or questions on this item? Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mrs. Snead.
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read ordinance 026-2020?
Ordinance number 026-2020. Ordinance repealing section 909.05 and enacting new section 909.05 of the codified ordinances of the city of Troy, Ohio regarding payment plans for delinquent utility bills and establishing provisions for delinquent utility bills related specifically to the COVID-19 pandemic and declaring an emergency. This was the subject of report this evening. This is the first reading.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. How does council wish to act on this item?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It has been moved to suspend the three reading rule from Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
Yes.
Mrs. Snead,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes. Move for adoption.
Second.
Second.
The three reading rule has been suspended. It has been moved by Mr. Phillips to adopt the ordinance and seconded by Mr. Terwilliger. Are there any final comments or questions before we prepare to vote? Seeing none, Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
yes,
Mrs. Snead,
yes,
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling.
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read ordinance O27, 2020?
Ordinance number O27, 2020, ordinance authorizing the Board of Park Commissioners of the City of Troy, Ohio, to execute the Dayton Power and Light Company grant for electric right-of-way and easement at Waco Park and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading.
Move for suspension.
second,
It has been moved to suspend the three reading rule by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Rozell. Mrs. Knight, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Swazer,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
yes,
Mrs. Snead,
yes,
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger.
Yes.
The three reading rule has been suspended. How does council wish to act?
Move for adoption.
Second.
It has been moved by Mr. Phillips to adopt the ordinance, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Are there any final comments or questions before we prepare to vote? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Rozell,
yes,
Mrs. Snead,
yes,
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Schilling,
Yes.
Mr. Terwilliger,
Yes.
Mr. Swazer.
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Mrs. Knight, will you please read the last ordinance of the evening? Ordinance O28, 2020.
Ordinance number O28, 2020, an ordinance changing the zoning of parcel number D0805790 in the city of Troy, Ohio, from the zoning classification of R4 Single Family Residential District to OC1 Office Commercial District. This has been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission. The address is 430 Kirk Lane. There will be a public hearing at the next council meeting, first reading.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. And since there will be a public hearing, this will stand as the first reading. This time, do we have any communications or announcements, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, we do, Mr. Lutz. There
Mrs.
was.
Knight, please go ahead.
I forwarded to council an email that was sent by Ms. Sonia Holycross on behalf of Mr. McCoy related to traffic associated with the Lincoln Community Center improvement. And again, that was forwarded to all members of council for your
Excellent.
information.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Moving on to comments. Mayor Robinoda.
Do not have any,
Mayor O, did you have any comments this evening?
I do not have any comments this evening. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Mayor. Director of Public Service and Safety, Mr. Titterington, do you have any comments this evening?
Just one, and it relates to the items of interest, just to point out that we had several hires or promotions in the last couple of weeks. Ken Parks, who was the Assistant Superintendent at a wastewater treatment plant, was promoted to the superintendent's position, effective on May 11th. You may recall that you approved a new lead operator position in the street department. Bruce Eliason, who is an equipment operator, he has been promoted to that position. And then we have two new firefighter EMTs on board, Ryan Trotter and Bruce Afsher. They started as of May 13th. Congratulations to all of them. That's all I have, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Titterington. This time we'll go over to Director of Law. Mr. Grant Kerber is on the line. Grant, do you have anything to add this evening?
I have nothing good for the order.
Thank you, Mr. Kerber. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Now going on to our illustrious city auditor, Mr. Friggy. Mr. Friggy, do you have anything?
Thank you, Mr. President. I have nothing at this time.
Good to see you, Mr. Friggy. Thank
Good
you.
to be here.
Do any council members have anything that they would like to add tonight for the proceedings?
Councilman Bill, or President Bill, I have a question
Go right
for
ahead.
Patrick. And I might have missed it, but have we made a decision on opening of the city pool yet? I had a couple questions from neighbors walking by. I think it was Saturday or Sunday, and I haven't seen anything, but
I think the staff, I know the staff is still reviewing. I believe the state finally put out the regulations. So the staff is reviewing whether or not it was feasible for us to open. We anticipate that there will be a decision this week, one way or the other.
okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Twist. Any other council members have any comments or questions they'd like to add?
Well, Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
on that, things that are listed in the items of interest, such as the upcoming events for the farmers market and concerts, movies at Treasure Island, when are decisions going to be made about those events? Is there some timeline?
There is a timeline. We don't know it. But as it happens, we will make the decision as quickly as possible and get updated information out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Spade. Any other comments or questions from council members this evening? Any comments or questions from staff members? See none. Mrs. Knight, do we have any citizens' comments that may have been submitted via email? That was the
Sorry,
only one.
that was
That
the
was the
only one.
communication.
That was the communication, yes, sir.
Cool. All right. Seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting. We will be back here virtually on June 1st, 2020. Everyone have a good evening.
Hopefully not.
Thank you.
Thank you all.